We're on Pevav Amud Beis, 86b, toward the bottom, last few lines. So in our discussion yesterday, we mentioned two statements which are going to play into today's Gemara. The first is a statement on power and how taking a leadership position brings one to an early grave. So one of the statements the Gemara said yesterday, Harashus v'kaveres es ba'aleha, that the pressures of power, the pressures of taking on responsibilities is cause of stress and therefore, God forbid, premature death. And the other statement is, we mentioned this idea that halavai, if only one entered this world, one left this world, with the same purity of soul as one did when they entered this world. So those two statements are going to come into play in the following Gemara. Second to last line, Pevav Amud Beis, second to last line, 86b. Gemara says as follows: Rav, the famed Rav, when he was about to go and sit in judgment, Amar Hachi would say the following: B'tzvu nafshe, by his own will, lakotla nafik, I am going out to my death. Because if I were to render judgment incorrectly, and God forbid, send someone else to their death by capital punishment, and if it's done incorrectly, then I am liable for death by the hands of heaven, for having failed this litigant or this defendant. So by my own will, I'm willingly walking to my own death, risking it at least. Right? This is this idea that taking on a position of leadership, even if it's a good one, even if it's a necessary one, has its risks for the one taking it. And then you continue and say, the tzu besa less who of it, and the will of my home I am not doing by going to be a judge, because I'm not getting paid for it, I'm not getting compensated. The rikon lebesa azel, and I return home empty-handed. It's not as if I get paid for it. I'm not allowed to get paid for it. I get paid for it, and there's a question of bribery. He's paying the defendants, the prosecution. I mean, either way, if I get paid for it, there's an issue of my judgment being imparted. And therefore, by my own will, I'm taking the risk of taking my own life in my own hands by going to judge. And I'm not getting the reward is very low because I'm not bringing home any profit. And therefore, the will of my home, I'm not doing either. The Levi. So till now, we've been hearkening to that statement we said about positions of leadership being to the detriment of the one holding that position, or at the risk at least. And now we have that other statement, which is, if only your soul left this world, same purity as it did when it came in. So the Gemara uses the same language now, or Rabbi would say the same language, but in a different context. The Levi, and if only, Shetehebia, my return home, or my entering back home when I'm done giving court, Kiyetzia, should be as pure as motive as it is when I leave my home. I'm leaving now to go render judgment, and all I have in mind is to do the right thing. And I'm hoping that I will do the right thing. And if I hope when I come home, I will be as guilt-free as I am when I walk into judgment. So in a sense, Rav, sitting in judgment, put himself in judgment. And he saw the court not just as a trial of the defendants, but as a trial of his own honesty, his own knowledge, his own trustworthiness. And that was like a self-regulating mechanism to keep himself in check, so that he is, first of all, remains humble in his decisions, understanding the risks he's taking, and with humility comes honesty. So it's like a self-regulated, keep checks and balances system, instead of what human nature might be. I'm going to judge, and I feel a certain sense of power. I have the power to decide the fate of this person, that person, who's going to be rich, who's going to be poor, who's going to be capital punishment. God forbid, if it gets that far. He would never do that because he never had a Sanhedrin. But theoretically, in theory, right, that's his power, or lashes at least. He's sitting in judgment, and that can get to one's head, and then he feels a sense of power. And therefore, before he would go to court, he would make this statement, reminding himself, A, of his own failings, It's possible he's wrong. And if he's wrong, he's taking the blame on himself. So keeping his humility and keeping his honesty in check. And the next line of the Gemara is repetition, but this time not from Rav, rather from Rava. And because it's a repetition, there are those who actually say it doesn't belong there. But we're going to read it anyway because it's here. So Rava would do the same thing. You have a nafik ladina when he would go out to sit in judgment. Omar Hachi would say the following. Now we're moving to the top of Pei Zion, Amud Aleph, 87a. And he would say, Rava would say, just like Rav did, by my own will, I'm walking to my own death, risking death at the hands of heaven if I cast judgment incorrectly. And the will of my home I'm not doing because I'm not getting paid. And if I come home empty-handed. And Levi, and if only that my coming back home should be as pure and as honest and as true as I am walking out of my home.
Exactly the same expression.
Sorry?
Word for word.
It's the exact same expression, which is why some take it out and say it's a mistake.
Word for word.
And that really that the next line is Rav. But anyway, okay, so the Gemara says like this. Now the Gemara is making a statement now about the same person it spoke of before. So either it's about Rava or it's about Rav. Right? Because the Gemara said a statement about Rav, that he would say this statement of reminding of humility and honesty before he would go to judge. And then the Gemara said the exact same statement was made by Rava. And then the Gemara goes on to say, and he would, X, Y, Z, what we're about to say. So if you're of the view that this statement of Rava belongs in the Gemara, then the following statement is what Rava did. If you're of the view that you take that statement out, and therefore only Rav would make that statement before he would go to court, then the following statement is not a statement about Rava, but about Rav. It's a difference about, I think, 2 generations. No, but 1 generation actually. Rava was the next generation of after Rav. Abai and Rava, right after Rav and Shmuel. Correct? Correct, I believe so. So it's a question of a scholar within a few decades of each other. Certainly within, a century would be way too long. Within a few decades for sure. Okay, so what's the statement that this scholar would say? When he would see, for lack of a better term, the entourage behind him. He's a famous scholar, judge, world-renowned Jewish thinker, philosopher, legal authority. So he'd walk down the streets, there was an entourage. So again, this might get to his head. And he'd feel pride, and even some ego. So he'd have like a kind of statement he would say, again, to keep himself in check, to remind him, this is not about me. Omar, he would say, if he were carried off to the heights of the heavens, and his head reached the cloud, meaning even if he reached the highest heights, person reaches the highest heights that society allows and affords him, he's at the top of his game. He will get lost just like the waste he produces. The waste you produce decomposes. So am I going to decompose. Maybe not tomorrow, as my waste might, but in a few years from now. But we're all going to end up decomposing. This is a quote from a verse, by the way. Now the verse is in, let's look it up. The verse is in Eov, in the book of Job, chapter 20, verse 6. So again, if he reached the highest heights of the heavens and his head is in the clouds, he's on top of the world, like his own waste, unto eternity, he'll decompose and get lost. And those who see him now will say, Ayoy, where is he? Where is he? Okay, so the simple meaning is talking about the body. The body is going to decompose, so I'm gone. We could think of this a little bit further and deeper, as in as follows. Right there, he's talking about the decomposing of waste, right? So when a person eats, the internal organs have a system of separating the nutrients from the waste. The waste, the body, ejects. I'm trying to find a nice way of saying this. Expels is a good word. But the nutrients the body absorbs, right? So this is often used, certainly in Kabbalah, for like describing the idea of what we call birurim, which are, in everything in the world, you have its kernel of goodness, it's the positive element, the godly spark in it, and then you have the rest of it, which is waste, right? Which is not godly. And the idea is to find the godly, redemptive element of everything in this world and use it. So that's what's called birudim. Birudim literally comes from the word boider, which means to select. Because what you're doing here is you're selecting the good in everything that exists, using it, exposing it, making sure that the good is used, and then letting all the negative parts of it to fall away. Right? This table, there's a godly element to it, in that it could be used for the study of Torah. So right now we are redeeming the godly elements that are in this computer, that are in this table, and we're letting the rest go away. And therefore, the same thing is true. Rava is saying here, in my leadership, I have to be able to find the kernel of truth that's for Hashem himself. And that's going to be eternal. Because if all I have is the waste, all I have is the pride and the ego, that's going to be gone. And then they're going to look around and say, where are you? What's left of you? Nothing's left of you, because all you were in your lifetime was about the physicality, and the physicality is gone. But if I remove the nutrients, I remove the positive element of it, meaning to say, I use this power, this position that I'm in for a godly purpose, then when they say, where are you? There's plenty left here. There's the Torah I taught. There's the goodwill that I left with my community. Right? So there is elements that will live on. But if all of it, just like food, right? There's some parts of the food that go to waste, and some part of it to become nutrients for my body. So likewise, spiritually, there's parts of my life that are going to decompose like waste. And there's parts of my life which are going to endure. The parts that I invested in spiritual life and serving Hashem and in teaching others and leading others to live positive lives. And therefore, as a leader, I'm looking at myself and saying, if all I have is the honor and the glory, then that is the waste part of it. It's not the nutrient part of it. It's the waste part of it. And that's going to be decomposed one day, and everybody's going to look around and say, what's left of you? Nothing.
It's very hard to make that comparison because you have no control over what nutrients are.
Yeah. So that's right. When it comes to the physical body, you don't have a choice. But when it comes to the spiritual, you do have a choice. Which, by the way, since we talked about this, just to put, so this Kabbalah explains, this is why on Shabbos, you're not allowed to do boider. One of the prohibitions on Shabbos is not to select. Why don't we select on Shabbos? For this spiritual reason. Because selection, as we just explained, is engaging the physical world, finding the redemptive element, and selecting it to be used for holiness. On Shabbos, we're detached from the world. So in Shabbos, we're not engaged in elevating the world. We live in a world elevated. We're detached from the physicality. And therefore, no boider on Shabbos. Unless it is good from good. On Shabbos, you'll have to select good from good. Right? If it's for the sake of just the good, right? Which means you can't be actively engaged in getting rid of bad. You're just engaged in good. Whereas during the week, you could be actively engaged in getting rid of bad, right?
What's an example?
On Shabbos? Okay, so I don't like tomatoes. You're talking about the halachic sense? I don't like tomatoes, but I do like carrots. And the tomatoes and carrots are mixed together. So if I take all the tomatoes and move them to the side, then I've selected the tomatoes, removed it from the carrots. But what I could do is just take the carrots straight out. Or if I liked all of them, and I'm just selecting one after the other, then I'm allowed to do that as well.
When you look at the fridge on Shabbos, and you see the carrots over here and the tomatoes beside it,
yeah, so,
you're selecting again.
Okay, so when it comes to the fridge, it's a little different, because in order for this is the halachic sense, it's a little bit of a digression, but the halachic principle is that it's only if all the items are actually mixed together. In other words, if they're sitting side by side, then selection doesn't count here. So for example, if you had a bucket of socks, pail, like a basket of socks, and you wanted a specific pair of socks at the bottom, you could not take the ones that you don't want off and put them aside and put the next, till you finally got to the one you want. That would be selection. I'm removing the bad socks, the ones I don't want, to get to the one I do want. What you would have to do is dump the whole basket out, spread it out, and then take the one I want, because I've never selected there. I've separated them from each other. It's subtle, but it's important to know this halacha. Okay. Now, a similar thing the Gemara tells us about keeping our pride in our position of leadership in check, right? Rabbi would say, reminding himself that his physicality is going to become waste and decompose, and thus reminding him to remain true, not to the ego side of power, but to the responsibility to be able to share and give, because that's the stuff that endures. Gemara says the following, and we'll conclude with that. Rav Zutra, ki have b'Shabbat deragilabo. So Rav Zutra actually tells us was very weak. Yeah, where's the Rashi there? Yeah, he was old. I'm sorry, not weak. He was old, I guess, old and weak. And so there was a whole system back in the day of when different scholars would go speak in public on Shabbos. People would work all week, and then on Shabbos was time when the big drashas, big sermons were given to the public. I mean, to some degree, it's still the same truth today. And when it was Rav Zutter's time to give his speech, so the Gemara is saying that they would carry him in on, like, you know, those like these little boxes that they would carry on people's shoulders. It's a thing they used to do, like a carriage they would carry, people would carry on their shoulders. You know what I'm talking about? There's a word for it. I don't know what it's called. There's a word for it. It's like a kind of box with poles attached to it, and people would carry him on shoulders. And the reason why he would do that is because if he were to walk, then everybody in the room would have to stand up as he walked in. And because he's older and weaker, his walking would take a long time, which means for all that time, people would be standing and waiting for him to sit. And not to inconvenience the community, he would have himself carried in. It's interesting that Rashi says that. Rashi could have just said they carried him in because he's old and weak. It was hard for him to walk, period. But it almost sounds like for his own convenience, he would have walked. He wouldn't have made other people carry him for his own convenience. But because his walking would have inconvenienced the rest of the community, because as long as he's walking, people are standing out of respect, so he decided he would get carried into shul so that nobody would stand up the whole entire time while he's walking. 2 minutes.
Oh, it's okay, 10 minutes ago.
And so as he was carried in, so of course there's a whole honor here. He's being carried in, and there's the, even though he's doing it for the purpose of not inconveniencing to the community, so he's doing it for the reason of respect, but there is the element of this great honor. He's being carried in, and he doesn't want it to get to his head. So what would he do? So when they would carry him on their shoulders on the Shabbos that he was supposed to give the speech, he would say, quoting a verse again. This verse is in, look it up, Mishlei, Proverbs 27:24. He would say, Ki loy la'olam chasan, the glory is not forever. And does the crown exist from one generation to another? It doesn't. So the honor and the glory does not stay forever. Again, this harkens back to what we said before about Rav. The glory and the honor does not stay forever. The teachings I'm going to share stays forever. And therefore I have to be focused on what I'm giving to the community and not focused on what the community is giving me and all the accolades that come along with it and all of the, the honor and the glory and the power that comes along with what I'm giving to the community. Keep that aside and focus, because that does not stay forever. That decomposes, as Rav said it before, and focus on the positivity that I'm giving to the community, because that does endure. And therefore, when I'm being carried in, remember, the point here is not to inconvenience the community. It's not about me and me being carried on someone else's shoulders because I'm such a big scholar. Okay, so we're going to stop over here. Very beautiful Gemara as we just learned. And tomorrow, Monday, we get into some of the things you actually mentioned earlier about the wicked doing well in life versus the righteous doing not so well in life, and what that all means. Okay, and then we're going to get actually to other statements about the eternality of righteous deeds and the temporality of the opposite. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful Shabbos.